Hello and welcome to Empire of Brazil Family Drama Extra History Part 3. Right, so what's happening now? The last one ended with Pedro on a journey, and he was taking a shit in a field, and he heard about I think it was the military junta in Lisbon. The Portuguese demands that Brazil reverts back to colonial status, and they don't have all of those juicy reforms, not able to trade freely with other countries, especially Britain. But yeah, I think that was around 1817. No, not 1817, 1820. I think they said that's when there were the soldiers rising up. I don't know. But yeah, Pedro heard the demands, rejected them, and then it leads to this family drama. So yeah, between his dad, because João was the king of Portugal. Yeah, he was the king of Portugal, and he was then back in Lisbon after residing in Brazil for many years. Let's go.
Rio de Janeiro, November 12th, 1823.
Okay.
It's the early hours of the morning, and Brazil's Constitutional Assembly is in crisis. Originally formed to choose which Portuguese laws apply in Brazil, the Assembly has decided that, instead, they will draft a Brazilian constitution. The more liberal Brazilian party controls the body. They want a constitution that restrains the power of the monarchy, where the rival Portuguese party, who wants greater royal power, is vastly outnumbered. But Emperor Pedro has decided to have his say. Refusing to be a figurehead, he surrounded the building with troops and demanded the assembly dissolve. They comply, at the point of a bayonet, in what will come to be called the Night of Agony. Oh, don't get it twisted. Pedro wants a constitution, but he himself will write it.
Oh, Pedro, man, what the fuck? In the last video, they were describing him as being quite an enlightened despot, or it was the Age of Enlightenment, and he was it the Age of Enlightenment? Yeah, like Voltaire, Rousseau, John Milton Keynes. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, he was meant to be a good guy. He was painted out to be a hero. Well, not a hero, but he was meant to be a good guy. What happened, Pete?
Thanks so much to CuriosityStream for helping to tell today's historical tale. When Pedro declared Brazil independent in 1822, he was still years away from actually taking control of the country. Covering vast territory and difficult to govern from the center, it was 1824 before Pedro had forced the last Portuguese troops out and re-established control of the provinces. Though in reality, he'd be fighting for control his whole reign. Portugal would not officially recognize Brazil's independence until 1825, and only then due to British mediation and a humiliating list of caveats. Not only did Britain get special trading rights for brokering the deal, but Brazil had to reimburse Portugal for property left behind by the Portuguese who had fled. And John VI got to pretend that he granted Brazilian independence. The British also stipulated that Brazil promised to work toward ending the slave trade. In the meantime, Pedro also inherited two ongoing political crises. The first was a war in Brazil's southernmost province, only annexed in 1821, which was trying to break away with the help of a neighboring country we know today as Argentina. And the second was the always restive Northeast, which rose up in reaction to the Night of Agony, briefly declaring itself the Confederation of the Equator before Pedro smashed the uprising and executed its leaders. Oh, and who ran Brazil when Pedro was at war, you ask?
His missus.
The Guardian calls the Pixel 6 the very best.
Interesting. This is actually really interesting.
Is HelloFresh worth the price? Absolutely.
God, come on, man.
In the beginning, I was doubtful too.
That would be Leopoldina. Yet the most dangerous challenge was the increasing factionalism between the Brazilian and Portuguese parties. While the rural landowners of the Brazilian party had been pro-independence and helped vault Pedro into his position, he quickly found that they wanted him to be largely powerless. He therefore switched sides, falling in with the more recently arrived urban class of the Portuguese party who ran the economy in the cities. Though the irony was that both of these were, in the terms of the time, liberal parties. Both believed in constitutional government, though they differed in details. In fact, they differed so much that at one point political mobs flooded the streets of Rio in a multi-hour-long bottle-throwing war. But when Pedro and his ministers drafted the constitution in 1824, it was the Portuguese party that he mostly kept in charge. And the resulting document was extremely liberal for its time, with more rights than many European constitutions of the period. The government would have the three standard branches of the US version: executive, legislative, and judicial, plus a fourth for the king to moderate the other three. The resulting system has been called a presidential monarchy, where the emperor, as head of the executive branch, could also appoint cabinets, judges, and legislators at the General Assembly. Also, voting for the Representative Assembly was restricted to property-owning men. But the value of property was low enough that a full 15% of the population could vote. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but given that the United States led the Americas at 18% and the European states averaged about 5 to 6% at the time, it was pretty good. However, it also enshrined slavery in law and barred enslaved people from citizenship. Pedro, though himself a slave owner, had come to favor abolition. Yet, like almost all Brazilian abolitionists, he wanted to see it phased out gradually because he feared general emancipation would turn into a violent Haitian-style revolution. But in practical terms, he was really just kicking the issue down the road. And while Pedro largely respected this constitution, the Night of Agony solidified him in the Brazilian party's mind as an enemy of constitution.
Very interesting. That's actually very interesting to hear that it was quite a liberal constitution for the time. It's not surprising to hear that Europe's not very democratic because, lol. The Night of Agony sounds agonizing, is the word, I suppose.
Constitutionalism. And then came the family problems. Because in the midst of this political rancor, Pedro's private life was burning down in public and taking parts of Europe with it. Remember when Pedro went to Sao Paulo and declared independence? Well, while there, he also met a woman named Domitila de Castro, who became his... Domitila de Castro.
Domitila de Castro. Nice. Yeah, this guy is such a dog, man. Like, at least he's not like his old man and doesn't carry around fucking chicken in his pockets.
Who became his mistress. Now, previously, the serially unfaithful Pedro had hid his affairs. But with Domitila, he gave her a house, made her a baroness, legitimized their children, and just generally flaunted the relationship. And when Leopoldina objected, he got cruel. Deciding to rub it in her face, he made Domitila her lady-in-waiting and insisted the two appear together in public. He also isolated Leopoldina in the palace, where she lived friendless and humiliated. Which in historical terminology, and I want to make sure I get this phrase right, hold on a second. Yes, here it is, was a huge jerk move, especially considering all Leopoldina had done to secure independence.
What? This Pedro guy is sounding like a bit of a knob, to be honest. What the fuck? Maria sounds alright. She started off a bit authoritarian, but you know, she's kind of come around to the liberal ideals, liberal idealism and stuff. That's really sad, man. That domestic abuse back then. They wouldn't have even... It was just normal. Like... Oh, God. Right, let's keep watching.
And make Pedro emperor. But the problems were not just marital strife. Family drama also flared up across the Atlantic. In March of 1826, King John of Portugal suddenly died. And true to his indecisive nature, he'd mentioned that he wanted Pedro to succeed him, but he never made it official. Suddenly, Pedro started insisting he was King of Portugal as well as Emperor of Brazil. But his mother, Carlota Joaquina, wanted Pedro's brother Miguel to become king instead. Problem was, Miguel was living in exile in Vienna as a result of joining one of Carlota's failed rebellions against his father. Pedro became the absentee king of Portugal, but his claim was on shaky ground, since by law, foreigners couldn't inherit the throne, and his declaration of independence made him technically Brazilian and not Portuguese. Interests in Brazil were also made him
Brazilian with two L's. Come on, guys.
Brazilian and not Portuguese. Interests in Brazil were also unhappy with the arrangement, thinking he might abandon them for Lisbon like his father did. Realizing that he had to choose between his kingdoms, Pedro figured out a way to keep the crown in the family. A little too much in the family, actually. He abdicated the Portuguese throne in favor of his 7-year-old daughter Maria, promising his brother Miguel that in a few years he could return from exile, marry Maria, and they could rule together.
Ugh. Oh my god, that's an uncle and a niece. That is so disgusting. Oh.
As uncle, niece, husband, and wife. But in the meantime, he could basically run Portugal from Rio. So yeah. And that, right then, was when Leopoldina sprung her revenge. See, she had a lot of time while being isolated in the palace, and she'd spent it writing letters to her family about everything Pedro had done to her. Letters that wound up in some pretty powerful hands, given that her sister had been married to Napoleon and her father was the Emperor of Austria. But then, in a tragic twist, in December of 1826, Leopoldina died from complications following a miscarriage. Pedro, fighting in the south with Domitila in tow, wasn't even there to visit her deathbed. And this proved the turning point where Pedro's family problems started becoming political problems. Because Leopoldina was more popular than he was, and her lavish state funeral turned into an anti-Pedro hate fest. In Rio, people started throwing rocks at Domitila's house, and Pedro began feeling so guilty about his actions that he sent her away. Now, Pedro's public appearances were drowned out by chants of "Constitution!" and "Abdicate!" A situation that only worsened when Pedro lost the war in the south, with the Revel province gaining independence as the nation of Uruguay. Yeah. Things were even worse in Lisbon. When Miguel returned from exile in 1828, he kicked his Nissan out, declared himself an absolute monarch, and teamed up with...
They said Nissan. That's...
8. He kicked his Nissan out, declared himself an absolute monarch, and teamed up with his mother in a reign of terror, which left Pedro trying to rally liberal support for Maria's restoration, while the absolutists and most of Pedro's sisters backed Miguel. In Brazil, his throne felt at risk. In Portugal, he was at war with his family, and he couldn't even get remarried because Leopoldina's letters had wrecked his reputation in Europe, and no other princesses would have him. It took him 3 years to find a bride. By 1831, he decided he was done with Brazil, its factions, and its politics. All he wanted was to get to Portugal and secure his daughter's throne. So he did the logical thing. Name his 5-year-old son Pedro temporary regent, and head on back to Portugal with an army to depose his brother. There, he fought and dug trenches alongside his men. A soldier's soldier. He regained in war some of the respect he'd lost among the European nobility. And once he won the war and restored Maria, it felt like a new beginning. But then, he started to sicken.
I need to know what happened next.
You're not ready for it.
Pedro I, Emperor of Brazil, died of tuberculosis an ocean away from the country he'd helped found, and left a 5-year-old child on its throne. Which I'm sure will go great, but we'll find out for sure next time. But you know what has gone great?
What? Sorry, no. What? Damn. I was so wrong. Okay, I didn't realise he would die. It must be Pedro II or something. Bruh. Okay. First of all, two things. First of all, I can't believe he died, man. I was really invested in this character. Historical figure. And second, you're telling me that Brazil, the Emperor of Brazil, took an army across the ocean and invaded Portugal. That's... I can't think of the word for it. If I was American, I would say that's pretty badass. But, yeah, that's a boss move. Like, that's... Fuck. That's very impressive. That's very impressive, Pedro. Yeah, this is really good. I'm actually gonna watch the next one now. and it's not going to be like the other times when I say I'm going to watch this now, because it's late, but right now it's only 9:15, 9:20, and yeah, I need to watch the next thing. The next episode is called
Us
Anarchy,
joining-
I think. Wait, let me just check. There's nothing else. No, nothing else. Cool. Yeah, the Anarchy. Right. So I'm going to watch that. Give that a like, because I like that. Oh shit, I didn't realise I didn't subscribe to Extra Credits. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to watch the next one now. Hopefully I will see you guys there. Bye.